does telling your team you want to make a killing actually encourage reckless business behavior?
Oh, that's an interesting question.
Right. I mean, think about it. The idioms we use at work might be secretly dictating our corporate strategies without us even realizing it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, actually.
Welcome back to Superbly Said Advanced English Vocabulary and Phrases. And today's material is actually sourced directly from a SpeakDuo lesson.
Which is such a great resource.
It really is. So, if you are looking to actively improve how you communicate, I highly recommend you go to SpeakDuo.com. You can meet new people from all around the world, practice your English on video calls, and really just become more confident with your speaking abilities.
Definitely check that out.
Yeah. Now, today's session is strictly for advanced English learners. So we are going straight into the idioms at hand, no fluff, to figure out how the words we choose actually shape the professional reality we live in.
It is a super fascinating angle. And if we look at the first set of concepts from the lesson, they heavily revolve around the realities of stepping into a leadership role.
Right, because the language you use when you assume power kind of dictates how your team will respond to you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Which brings up the concept of deciding to take the reins.
Yeah, take the reins. I mean, the literal imagery makes sense, right? Grabbing the leather straps to steer a horse or, a carriage.
Right, taking control.
But in a modern professional setting, I have to be honest, taking the reins sounds suspiciously like a polite excuse for micromanaging. I mean, how is it any different?
Well, I totally see why you'd make that connection.
Yeah.
But the psychological difference between the two is actually massive.
Yeah.
It really comes down to the presence or absence of a vacuum.
A vacuum.
Yeah, like a leadership vacuum.
Yeah.
Micromanaging is an intrusion. It's, hovering over someone, dictating every tiny detail of a job they're already actively trying to do.
Oh, right, sure.
But taking the reins requires a vacuum. It implies there is no one currently steering the ship, and, well, if someone doesn't step up, the whole thing crashes.
Okay, I like to visualize it like being in a car. So micromanaging is leaning over from the passenger seat and violently grabbing the steering wheel while the driver is still trying to navigate the road.
Yes.
Which is incredibly dangerous.
It's dangerous and, quite frankly, highly annoying for the driver. But taking the reins is realizing the driver's seat is suddenly empty and you jump over to grab the wheel before the car goes off the cliff.
That captures the mechanism perfectly. It is about stepping up to a necessary responsibility during a transition or a crisis, right? Rather than just undermining someone else's autonomy.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
So if you were speaking with your boss about a recent challenge, you wouldn't want to say you micromanaged the team. You would say, when the team leader left abruptly, I had to take the reins and coordinate everyone to ensure the project didn't fall behind.
I like that. It paints you as a problem solver filling a void, not a control freak creating a problem. Exactly.
But, once you are in that driver's seat, you suddenly have to deal with the landscape in front of you. Which introduces our next concept, the idea that certain challenges just come with the territory.
Right. When you accept a specific role, you accept everything that inherently belongs to it, the good and the bad. It's just an unavoidable consequence of a particular situation.
Wait, isn't that just a longer way of saying occupational hazard?
Well, they overlap, but the nuance is really important for advanced speakers. An occupational hazard usually implies a distinct, often physical danger or a very specific negative risk.
Like what?
Like a chef getting a burn, or maybe a data entry clerk getting carpal tunnel. But what comes with the territory is much broader.
Okay.
It isn't necessarily a danger. It can be entirely neutral or just a frustrating bureaucratic reality. It is simply the landscape you agreed to walk into.
Ah, that distinction makes a lot of sense. So, for those of you preparing for a proficiency test, this is a brilliant phrase to deploy. Let's say you are in an IELTS speaking exam, specifically part 2, where you have to speak at length, and the examiner asks you to describe a challenging job you've had.
Oh, that's a perfect scenario.
Right. You could say, I'm not a fan of the long nights and tight deadlines, but I accept that it just comes with the territory in the international consulting industry. It demonstrates a nuanced acceptance of professional realities.
Yeah, it signals to the listener that you aren't just complaining. You actually understand the systemic nature of your industry.
So, assuming you've taken the reins and you've accepted what comes with the territory, you now have to actually execute a strategy. You have to build momentum.
Right, which is hard.
It is.
Yeah.
But you don't always have to start from scratch, which brings us to the concept of deciding to piggyback on something.
Yes. To piggyback on means to use an existing idea or situation to add your own benefit or idea.
Now, let me push back on this one. If I am taking someone else's existing idea or momentum for my own benefit, isn't that just polite corporate theft?
I mean, it can certainly look like that if executed poorly, but the intent behind piggybacking is collaboration, or at least symbiotic alignment rather than theft.
Okay, how so?
Well, stealing an idea is malicious. It involves taking credit for someone else's original work and presenting it as your own genesis. Piggybacking is entirely different. Think of it like drafting in competitive racing, like cycling or motorsports.
Oh, like when one car drives closely behind another to reduce wind resistance?
Exactly that. You are using the existing momentum of the leader to pull yourself forward, but you are still driving your own car.
That's a great way to look at it.
You aren't claiming you created the wind resistance or the momentum. You are just cleverly aligning yourself with it to conserve energy. You're adding your own distinct value to something that is already in motion.
Okay, so in a workplace context, speaking colleague to colleague, you might suggest a strategy by saying, instead of hosting our own independent launch, let's piggyback on the community festival to attract more visitors to our stall.
Spot on.
You aren't claiming you organized the festival. You aren't stealing the festival. You are just drafting on its foot traffic.
It is a highly efficient strategy. You're maximizing output while minimizing input. And, well, when those smart strategies execute flawlessly, they often lead to dramatic financial outcomes.
Which brings up the concept of aiming to make a killing.
Exactly. This means to earn a large amount of money quickly and easily.
But let's look at the psychology behind that phrase for a second. Making a killing sounds structurally similar to making a living, but they drive completely different behaviors, don't they?
They dictate entirely different corporate mindsets. Making a living is about sustainability. It's the day-to-day survival, earning enough to pay rent, maintain overhead, and keep the lights on.
Slow and steady.
Right. It requires a slow, steady, risk-averse mindset. Making a killing implies a sudden, massive windfall. It is an extraordinary event, not a daily routine, and aiming for it often requires taking on significantly higher risk.
It's the difference between building a steady index fund portfolio versus betting your life savings on a single volatile tech stock.
That is a perfect analogy. So if we go back to our IELTS Part 2 scenario, maybe you were asked to describe a successful business decision you know about.
Okay.
You could say, they sold their vintage items at exactly the right moment and managed to make a killing from the sale. You are conveying a sense of dramatic, almost aggressive financial success.
But executing a killer strategy doesn't matter if you can't convince your team to follow you or your investors to back you. Your messaging has to be incredibly precise.
Communication is everything.
It really is. And this brings us to the nuances of communication, starting with the need to ensure your message hammers home the point.
Which means to make an idea or point extremely clear and forceful.
I often hear people say they want to highlight a point in a meeting. Is hammering it home just a louder version of highlighting?
It goes much deeper than volume, actually. Highlighting draws attention to a concept. You might use a visual aid or bold text to say, hey, look at this. But hammering home involves inescapable repetition and structural force.
Okay, so instead of just tapping a nail into a piece of wood so it sticks a little bit, it's about striking it repeatedly until it's completely flush and secure.
Yes, but let's elevate that analogy. Think of a trial lawyer delivering closing arguments. They don't just highlight the evidence.
Right.
They weave the evidence together so tightly and forcefully that the jury has absolutely no other logical conclusion to reach. They make the point inescapable.
Wow, they close off all other avenues of thought.
Precisely.
So in a corporate setting, if you were presenting feedback to a boss about a colleague's presentation, you might say, her clear, hard statistical data really hammers home the point that preparation and safety matter. She didn't just mention safety. She presented data so undeniable that ignoring safety is no longer an option for the team.
It becomes foundational. But, on the flip side of being clear and forceful, sometimes professionals let their anxiety dictate their communication.
Which leads to our next concept, gilding the lily.
Right. This means adding unnecessary ornament to something that is already good. Essentially overdoing it.
But wait, I use the phrase icing on the cake a lot when things get extra. Aren't they the same thing?
They are absolutely not interchangeable, and confusing them can change the entire tone of a conversation.
Really?
Yeah. Icing on the cake is a positive addition. The cake is fundamentally good, and the icing is a welcome bonus that makes it better. Gilding the lily has a distinctly negative connotation, usually driven by insecurity.
Oh, I see. Because a lily is already a beautiful, elegant flower in its natural state. If you try to paint it with gold, which is what gilding means, you actually suffocate the petals and ruin the flower.
Exactly. You ruin something elegantly simple by over-decorating it. In the workplace, this often happens because of imposter syndrome.
Oh, totally.
Someone is presenting to the C-suite. They feel they need to justify their salary, so they take a perfectly clear 3-slide deck and add 40 complex animations, transition sound effects, and dense jargon.
Just way too much.
Right. They think they're adding value, but they're actually destroying the clarity of the message.
They're suffocating the flower. So imagine you are trying to save a colleague from themselves before a big meeting. You might gently say, the presentation is perfectly clear as it is. Adding dozens of complex animations now would just be gilding the lily.
That's a great way to handle it.
It's a polite way of saying stop messing with the good thing before you break it.
It is a crucial intervention. And speaking of communication that looks shiny on the outside but lacks structural integrity, that brings us to our final concept before we test your memory, a puff piece.
So a puff piece is an article or broadcast that heavily praises someone or something while actively ignoring any flaws.
Yeah, it's journalism filled with air, puffed up, rather than solid, objective facts.
How does a puff piece differ from a traditional feature article? Because a feature article also focuses heavily on praising one person's accomplishments.
Well, a true feature article strives for comprehensive objectivity. It might highlight someone's massive achievements, but a good journalist will also critically examine their failures, their past controversies, and their blind spots.
Makes sense.
A puff piece, on the other hand, is heavily biased and utterly uncritical. In the modern era, PR firms often deploy puff pieces specifically for SEO manipulation.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, flooding the internet with glowing, empty articles to push negative search results down to page 3 of Google.
So it's not just bad journalism, it's an active PR strategy.
Definitely.
If you are analyzing media coverage, you might point this out by saying, the entertainment magazine published a puff piece about the actor after the premiere, completely ignoring the recent controversies. You're calling out the fact that the article was designed to flatter and manipulate rather than to actually inform the public.
You are recognizing the hidden agenda behind the vocabulary.
All right. We have unpacked the psychology and mechanics behind some incredibly nuanced, advanced vocabulary today. Now it is time to test your memory with an interactive quiz covering the 7 concepts we just discussed.
Let's see how well these ideas have been hammered home.
Here is how this works. I will read the prompt and 3 options, clearly designated as option A, option B, and option C. You will hear us weave the target phrase in heavily to keep it fresh in your mind.
And pay close attention.
Yeah. After I read the options, I will give you a prompt to pause the podcast if you need a moment to think. Immediately after that, we will reveal the correct answer, repeat the target phrase, and give you a quick reminder of the underlying mechanism we discussed earlier to really solidify your learning. Let's dive in.
Ready when you are.
Question 1. Which sentence uses the idiomatic phrase, a puff piece, correctly based on context?
Remember, a puff piece.
Option A. The professional pastry chef baking artisan was instructed to make a puff piece during the dessert preparation shift. Option B. The deeply frustrated young retail clerk aggressively managed to completely drop a white line. Option C. The entertainment magazine published an uncritical puff piece that praised the celebrity's charm while completely ignoring his recent professional scandals. Feel free to pause the podcast here if you need to think about the answer.
The correct answer is option C, a puff piece. If you recall our discussion on PR tactics and SEO manipulation, a puff piece refers to media that acts almost like a PR stunt, heavily praising a subject while deliberately ignoring any flaws or controversies.
Let's keep the momentum going. Question 2. Select the context where the phrase hammers home the point is most appropriately used figuratively.
Hammers home the point.
Option A. Through compelling case studies and hard statistical data, the keynote speaker effectively hammers home the point that cybersecurity must be prioritized. Option B. The professional construction site carpentry roofing contractor was instructed to hammer home the point during the timber framing. Option C. The incredibly clumsy warehouse inventory clerk accidentally managed to quickly buy some large systems. Feel free to pause the podcast here if you need to think about the answer.
The correct answer is option A, hammers home the point. Just like our analogy of a trial lawyer making a conclusion inescapable for a jury, This option perfectly demonstrates using undeniable data to ensure an idea is deeply understood and cannot be ignored.
Spot on. Now for question 3. In which situation does someone accurately utilize the advanced phrase, gilding the lily contextually?
Gilding the lily.
Option A. The professional botanical gardening greenhouse technician was instructed to check gilding the lily during the spring floral inventory. Option B. The minimalist architectural design was already stunningly elegant. Adding elaborate Baroque ornaments to the facade would simply be gilding the lily. Option C. The completely terrified young wilderness traveler unexpectedly noticed an exceptionally massive, heavy tool chest. Feel free to pause the podcast here if you need to think about the answer.
The correct answer is option B, gilding the lily. Remember our discussion about imposter syndrome driving someone to ruin a simple, perfectly clear presentation with too many animations. Option B captures that exact negative consequence of over-decorating something that is already elegantly simple.
Let's tackle question 4. Which response best demonstrates the advanced phrase, comes with the territory, figuratively?
Comes with the territory.
Option A. Accepting that irregular travel hours and constant client negotiations are simply aspects that come with the territory of being a senior consultant. Option B. The professional geographical surveying cartographer was instructed to check comes with the territory during the regional land mapping. Option C. The incredibly clumsy warehouse inventory clerk accidentally managed to quickly catch that white balance. Feel free to pause the podcast here if you need to think about the answer.
The correct answer is option A, comes with the territory. This aligns perfectly with the IELTS example we discussed, where you acknowledge the neutral but unavoidable realities and challenges that are just part of the overarching landscape of a specific job role.
Here is question 5. How would a professional accurately use the phrase make a killing contextually?
Make a killing.
Option A. The professional military tactics defense sniper was instructed to make a killing during the tactical combat exercise. Option B. The completely confused amateur theater group unexpectedly decided to proudly paint a clean frame. Option C. Timing the stock market perfectly by investing in the tech startup early allowed the venture capital firm to make a killing on their initial shares. Feel free to pause the podcast here if you need to think about the answer.
The correct answer is option C, make a killing. We emphasized earlier the stark psychological difference between a sustainable, low-risk approach to making a living versus securing a massive, quick financial windfall, which is exactly what timing the stock market perfectly represents in this option.
2 more to go. Question 6. Which scenario perfectly illustrates the meaning of the phrase, take the reins contextually?
Take the reins.
Option A. The professional equestrian breeding stable manager was instructed to take the reins during the morning horse riding session. Option B. Following the abrupt resignation of the creative director, the senior producer stepped up to take the reins and guide the project to completion. Option C. The incredibly clumsy hotel maintenance worker accidentally managed to completely drop that red tray. Feel free to pause the podcast here if you need to think about the answer.
The correct answer is option B, take the reins. This takes us right back to our first major distinction, stepping up into an empty driver's seat to fill a leadership vacuum, as opposed to maliciously micromanaging someone who is already driving the car.
Our final question to wrap up the quiz. Question 7. Which sentence accurately utilizes the advanced phrase, piggyback on, contextually?
Piggyback on.
Option A. Rather than planning an independent launch event, the small software startup decided to piggyback on the annual tech conference to showcase their app. Option B. The professional veterinary medicine animal care specialist was instructed to piggyback on during the clinical examination. Option C. The deeply confused young kitchen assistant accidentally managed to quickly slice a fresh piece of onion. Feel free to pause the podcast here if you need to think about the answer.
The correct answer is option A, piggyback on. As we discussed with the strategy of drafting in motorsports, this is all about efficiently utilizing someone else's existing momentum without stealing from them, adding your own distinct value to the crowd that is already gathered.
And that concludes our interactive quiz. If you are able to navigate those nuances, you have truly leveled up your professional vocabulary today. It's incredible how much psychological weight these everyday idioms carry.
They absolutely do. And, it brings us right back to the provocative thought we started with. We have analyzed the mechanics of these phrases, but as you go about your week, observe your own workplace. How often do the idioms you and your colleagues choose subconsciously shape your actual business strategies?
That's a great point.
If leadership constantly talks about needing to make a killing, are they inadvertently incentivizing their teams to take dangerous risks rather than building something sustainable, the words we choose might actually be steering the ship.
Wow, the vocabulary itself might be taking the reins. It's definitely something to think about during your next team meeting. Keep practicing your advanced vocabulary and